Hello and welcome back to Bicycle Legs and another edition of Bicycle Legs Discovers Rush. And today we have yet another wonderful guest from the Rush fans community, Mr. Rob Buchta. Rob, thank you so much for coming on the show and doing this with me.
Oh, thank you. I'm really thrilled you asked, and I'm glad I could be here to talk this album with you.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Rob to let everybody know what album we're going to be talking about, a little bit of the background behind that album, and most importantly, Rob, why you wanted to cover this album in particular with me.
Yes, the album that we're going to talk about today is Roll the Bones, and the background of the album was yes, I have a couple little my CD booklet, the tour book, and I don't have the vinyl yet, and I also have the cassette of the album, but my one of my siblings has that record on cassette as well as my other Rush albums on cassette. So, but yes, the background of the record comes at a time where the band was really enthusiastic about not only touring but just getting back to the recording process and actually going so far as cutting their holiday time short to get back into the studio and write. And the reason why I wanted to come on and talk about this album is because at the time this came out in 1991, I was doing other things with music, and I kind of didn't really coalesce and gel with this record for a long time. It wasn't until maybe 15 years ago, so I started to really go back and listen to this record. It just didn't click with me right away. And certain Rush albums are like that, where you don't really get them right away. Sometimes as time wears on, you get a new appreciation for the album. So for me, that's been the case. I'm sure other Rush fans can relate. So that was something I got enthusiastic about the album after going back into it and listening to it. So I kind of share that symbiotic relationship with the band. They had enthusiasm for the record, as now do I over the past 15, 20 years. I've really gotten to grown fond of this record. So that's a little bit of the background.
Yep.
And the way they started this record was really interesting too.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Let's get into it and sort of go through it track by track, and I'll give my sort of thoughts on, my initial listenings, because I've listened to the album sort of like three, four times, made my notes, and that's how I sort of do these shows each month. And yeah, it starts off with Dreamline, which is an up-tempo opening track. It's got this sort of arpeggiated guitar, is something I always really like. It's got prominent keyboards, but they're less intrusive than they might have been on some of those 80s records. I know that a lot of Rush fans have a problem with those keyboards towards the end of the 80s and that sort of thing. I'm a keyboards guy, so it's not really a bother for me, but yeah. Um, and we sort of have the lyrics, have the theme, or at least one of the couple of themes that will keep cropping up on this record, which is sort of about the uncertainty of life. Um, there's some sort of nice, sort of astronomical imagery in this song too, which I really like. Um, Alex's solo on this song starts really sort of understated. It's really quite sort of, there's just a few notes here and there. But it picks up intensity as it goes along. Um, it's a good energetic start to the album, and I thought Geddy's vocal on this song is quite restrained, It's certainly not sort of piercing and all that sort of thing like it is on some of those earlier records.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because the vocal performances on the record were kind of, I guess there was focal points on harmonies, the melodies, as always with Rush, but I think in particular with this record, having come off of Presto, and being this is the first album of the 90s with them, there was a sort of effort to sort of work melodies and vocal harmonies and things like that. So the register is definitely more subdued, like as you just mentioned, a little more lower in register. I think it's really to serve the melody better.
Yeah. So then we get Bravado, which is like a song about sort of being positive in the face of adversity, which is a bit of a Neil theme. He's written quite a few sort of songs like that. Um, it, it um, it's a mid-tempo song. It has a bit of a late 80s Marillion feel to it. I don't know if you're familiar with the band Marillion at all, but
Sure,
this
absolutely.
sounds like it could have been on like um Season's End or Holidays in Eden, that sort of Marillion feel.
Yeah.
Um, it's got the sound of the synths and the guitar tone of Alex's solo really reminds me of Steve Rothery from Marillion. Um, but yeah, it's an interesting song. It's like, as I say, it's not as up tempo as the first one. It's a little more laid back. Um, the synths on it are really atmospheric, and I really like that.
That's the thing with keyboards with Rush, because I'm on the fence too at times with keyboards, but really, um, regardless of the gear they use to play these things on keyboards, there's definitely a writing consideration for the use of those to create like atmosphere, mood, to enhance a certain thing that's happening musically. So they use the keyboards really wisely. I think over time, they've they've gotten better at placing the keyboards. And of course, with this record, Rupert Hine was instrumental, no pun intended, with placing the keyboards in certain parts. So I think the keyboards serve more of a support function than like a standout function. And even
Mm,
Alex's playing is always like it seems to fit really well with keyboards, but also the way he puts his parts in there. And in this song, Bravado, the drumming is subdued. Like with Dreamline, Geddy was a little more subdued in the vocal performance, but drumming wise, more of the intricate stuff comes at the end, of the song with him. There's like some
mm.
independence with his limbs and such with his drumming. If you listen real close towards the end, he's doing some really independent limb work on the drum kit. So, but yeah, the song itself really ties in to, I guess, at the time Neil was reading this book called The Tidewater Tales by John Barth. So there's a line in there that we will pay the price, but we will not count the cost. So I guess
Mm.
John gave Neil permission to use that line from his book. But the overall theme of the song really kind of ties in very well from Dreamline into Bravado. So it's definitely that consistent theme
Yeah, I
lyrically.
actually, I actually noted that lyric myself, though we will pay the price, but we will not count the cost. As sort of like a highlight of the lyric for me. So I didn't realize he'd actually borrowed that
Yeah.
from somewhere else. But
Yeah, even with Dreamline, it's a Kevin Anderson thing based on his book. It's called Lifeline, which I think was later changed to the Trinity Paradox, I think it was. And same Anderson that was involved with the Clockwork Angels
oh, okay.
books. Same
Oh,
dude, science fiction writer. Yep.
right. So then we get the title track, Roll the Bones. This has a really late 80s sound to it in the sort of music that was sort of in the charts in the late 80s. You can tell this is like, even though this came out in 1991, you can tell that musically this was in that period just before grunge hit, you
Right.
know, and it was the sort of music that was around in that sort of late 80s, maybe 1990, before grunge sort of really changed the landscape, as it were. Um, you know, um, m- you know, could you argue if that was a little behind in 1991? Maybe, but I mean, this album did really, really well for them.
Yeah, I think it
Um,
charted at number three. I think here in the States, and I think there was like a similar story in Canada. I'm not very good on the chart placings for the band, but yes, it was definitely a successful record for
yeah,
them. Yeah.
and then we've got the theme of chants cropping up here, with like rolling of dice or roll the bones, as it were.
Yep.
Um, I like the acoustic strumming in the choruses. Um, and I know, like, having gone through almost all the Rush albums by this stage, I realize that this band has a sense of humor. They like to do things that are off the wall and that sort of thing. And I'm assuming that's what the rap section in this song is. Having said that, though, it doesn't work for me. It to me it just comes across as kind of cringy. I'm sorry. But
Yeah, I hear you.
yeah.
It's an interesting song because, I give them kudos for having attempted to write because I think Neil was more into like the rappers at the time that were kind of writing a bit more substantive types of things and what they were talking about, the messaging in certain groups like I think Public Enemy,
Mm,
people like that, and even so far as going to possibly bring in somebody who was a rapper to rap on the song rather than having Getty do it. So there's this sort of thing with who did the rap on the record. It was actually Getty's voice, and they
mm,
did a harmonizer on his voice. So they did a treatment to his voice, which didn't change the tempo or the octave. It changed the octave of his vocal, but it didn't change the speed of it. So typically with harmonizers, that can affect the speed of the audio, but it didn't in this case. So they liked it so much that they decided to go with it. I'm not really a huge fan of the rap either. I think, I can, if it was on the radio and I had to listen to it, I could probably endure that, not a problem. But I think on Neil's behalf, he really wanted to kind of go into that direction. I'm glad they only did it one time to get that out of the system in a sense. But just the fact that they attempted to do that, I think gives me, um, it kind of solidifies a little more of the credibility of what the band actually does. They do change from record to record. They try new things. The expression is like that, saying that this isn't what Rush does isn't really in the vernacular of the band.
mm.
So they gave it the shot. I'm not really huge a fan of it, but I'm glad they did it and got that out of the way. So,
Yeah,
but yeah, there's interesting story behind all that, but that could be for another show. So
yeah. So we get Face Up next, and we've got the chance element, to life is being discussed again in the lyrics here. But instead of dice, we've got cards, turn it up or turn the wild card down, all that sort of thing. It's a really up-tempo song. It rocks. It's still got prominent keyboards in it. Um, but I have to say, these first sort of four songs, very straightforward by earlier Rush standards. I mean, the rap notwithstanding.
right.
Um, you know, they're quite straightforward, 4/4 kind of songs. They're sort of all around the 4 or 5 minute mark.
Mm.
Um, yeah, there's none of that sort of there's no real proggy elements yet. There's no sort of those new wave elements from the early 80s or that sort of police style sort of reggae sort of vibe. None of that really in this.
Yeah.
Um Getty, I mean, Alex has a short solo in this song and he gets a little shreddy in this one, which I've always sort of um observed throughout doing all these albums that Alex, generally speaking, is not a shreddy guitar player, but he gets a little shreddy in this one, which is nice for a bit of a difference, isn't it? It's a very energetic song. I really like it.
Yeah, that's this song is kind of what got Neil started on writing these sort of the themes and ideas for this record, about the cards being faced up or face down. That sort of phrase sort of brought in his sort of, turn it up, these sensory types of things that we deal with. You could turn certain things up, you could turn up your music, you could turn, uh, any number of things that, excite you. If you're cold, you can turn the heat up, things like that. So same with cards, you can turn them either direction. If you want to sort of call someone's bluff, you have your cards face down. If you want to call the bluff, you turn your cards up. So he really kind of latched onto this idea to kind of get the lyric sort of process rolling, so to speak. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So then we get Where's My Thing, which is subtitled Part 4 Gangster of Boats Trilogy. Now,
Yeah.
I've covered enough Rush albums at this stage to know that there is no Gangster of Boats trilogy, let alone this being part 4 of it.
Right.
So again, I think there's a little bit of Rush's sense of humor, being a little bit silly with the title. I'm here for that. I love it.
Yes.
And I also love the fact that this is a Rush instrumental because I've really enjoyed most of the Rush instrumentals that I've been exposed to so far. I actually wish they'd done a few more of them. This one, um, the first section of this one actually reminds me of YYZ a little bit.
Mm. Okay.
Um, the especially with the bass that Geddy's playing in that sort of first section. Um, then we get what I would describe as an instrumental chorus. This song is very this track is very song structured, which
Yeah.
is, unusual for a lot of instrumentals. Or often a lot of instrumentals are showcases for the individual instrumentalists in the band. this one, especially that sort of instrumental chorus in it, is more ensemble playing. It's less about chopsmanship and showing off, whereas, sort of the verse section, they get to be a little bit more uh, show off their talents a little bit more. But it's nice to have those sort of two distinct parts and have them do different things, one being a little more showy, one being a lot more ensemble. um this track actually is a little bit proggy because it's got a few different sections as they go through it, even though it's only just under 4 minutes long.
Very
um
short.
this is my favorite track on the album so far, and I think, without being too spoilery with the rest of the album, it's probably my favorite track on the album overall. So
Yeah, it's a the Gangster of Boats title is like was sort of like a threat, and I think it first showed up in the Hold Your Fire liner notes, and so I guess the idea with the instrumental was that with this one, you kind of tricked, Alex and Getty, and not giving any lyrics till you write an instrumental. So they wrote the music, and then Neil didn't give them any lyrics. So he basically kind of tricked them a little bit. So, but that was the threat, is using that as a title. If they didn't come up with the title, they would use that. So that, I guess, that kind of prompted some motivation for Alex and Getty to get the music together. So there's a little bit of story behind that. I'm probably not telling you very well, but that's kind of where it comes from. Anybody can go and investigate, if you want to go further into,
yeah,
what the deal with that was. But it was kind of a trick on Neil's end to Getty and
yeah.
Alex. So, but yeah.
And I want to say, for my viewers who maybe are like me and relatively new to Rush, and are investigating the band and all that sort of thing, I have found the cygnusx1.net
Mhm.
site an absolutely invaluable resource
Yes, they're
for information about albums, and for, like, before I bought, like, I've got this CD and it's part of the Atlantic Years box set, which I managed to pick up nice and cheap. But
yeah.
before I had any CDs or vinyl or anything like that of Rush, I was using the Cygnus X1 website for lyrics, so that I could follow along when I was listening and all that sort of thing. So yeah, it's an absolutely invaluable resource as far as I'm concerned, especially for newbies into Rush.
Yeah. No, it's a good point to bring up, because even like old magazine articles, which I grew up reading, you
Yeah,
can see those there. They're all, yeah. There's tons, like you said, there's tons of info. It's really like, yeah, definitely invaluable. I concur.
yeah. And they've also got a really good Star Trek section too, and I'm a
They
big Star
do,
Trek
yes, they
fan,
do.
so yeah.
Yeah,
So then we get on to, that was basically side one of the vinyl. So we get side two of the vinyl, and it starts with the big wheel,
yes,
which is another chance-based song, also tying into the uncertainty of life theme. So you've got the two themes sort of meshing together on
yeah,
this song. And this time, in our chance element, it isn't the dice, it isn't the cards, it's the sort of wheel of fortune, as it were, the big wheel to spin and see what comes up.
yeah,
Um, there's a good balance on this one, I think, between the guitar and the keyboards. Um, they mix up the feel of the verse, which makes the song more musically interesting. So, like, the first time they do the verse, they do it one way. The second time they do the verse, they do it a little bit differently,
yeah,
um, which, adds a little bit of interest to what's otherwise a relatively straightforward song musically. Um, and I mean, this song is, a lot of the lyric is referring to the end of the Cold War, which was really just happening as this album came out. Sort of the Eastern Bloc had fallen, but the Soviet Union hadn't quite fallen yet. But you could pretty much see that that was on the cards. No
sure.
pun intended.
Good.
Um, but it's not a triumphalist song, it's not like, oh, we won sort of thing, because it
Yeah,
definitely, verse one's talking about the troubles in the Eastern Bloc and all that sort of thing. But then verse two is talking about, sort of the dangers of consumerism in the West and that sort of thing.
yeah,
So it really does sort of balance it out. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm talking about Heresy there. Sorry, I've got my notes mixed
I was
up.
going to say, like with Big
Yeah,
Wheel, those two things kind of roll into each other, where the innocence of certain things, with the Big Wheel,
yeah,
and people might have thought that the song was autobiographical on Neil's end, but really it wasn't. It was just about it could be a narrative for anybody, for any one of us,
yeah,
that when you're a kid, you have a certain view of things and you have experiences after that,
yeah.
which shape everything. And actually, the Big Wheel is based on, I think, the poet William Blake, and
Oh,
he's
yes.
got a collection called The Songs of Innocence and Experience. So
Yeah,
that kind of ties into this a bit, and then the experience of what happened with heresy, with the historical
yeah,
experience, is a nice coupling of the two songs.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Um, Heresy, it's interesting musically. It has a bit of a like a late 80s sort of Simple Minds feel to me. I don't know if they're again a band that you're particularly familiar with, but
Yeah.
in the late 80s they sort of went away from their sort of synth poppy kind of thing and they went into this more sort of really lush atmospheric kind of almost Celtic kind of sound.
Oh, cool.
And I hear sort of bits of that in Heresy. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, Heresy's a bit more atmospheric than the other songs on the album, I think, which are a lot more straightforward rock kind of songs. And I like that about it. It gives it a little bit of different flavor for a song on this album.
Yeah, it's just even just the way Neil comes in with the fade in with the marching snare drum, and then later on he uses more African rhythms. So it's like the album itself at this point now, it's like it's starting to showcase different sides of the band musically. And of course, the
Yeah,
lyric content is, there's definitely some carry throughs from song to song, touching on each one of the themes that the album is based on. But yeah, this song in particular, um, he was talking about how he was angry about what happened, with, once all the things happened in the Eastern Bloc, people were excited and rejoicing about, things kind of falling away. But he was mad because of all the time, that was wasted and things like that, where you can't really get back that time. Those people can't get back those lives or the people they
mm,
lost. So he had a bit of anger about the whole thing, and there was an element of that. And then, of course, the overall sort of enthusiasm that, okay, there's change, happening. So it's a mixture of emotional content on this tune for sure.
yeah, yeah. No, I really like it. It might be my second favorite after Where's My Thing. So it's
And
it's
that
it's a great
openness and
track.
open feel of that song is like, it kind of feels jubilant, like
Yeah,
the feel of that, is something that I caught on to. That's why I like this tune as well. It feels different.
yeah. One thing I have noticed getting this far into the album, though, is we sort of mentioned at the beginning about Geddy, singing in the lower register, being a little more restrained, that sort of thing. It's a nice texture, but I feel like it's getting a little bit samey on this album. Like
Hmm.
on some of the later sort of 90s and 2000s albums, he would sing mostly in that lower register, but he would do a little bit of the higher register stuff just for a little bit of contrast.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like that's missing a little bit from this album.
Yeah. I think on this song, there's a bit of it more because there's more layering vocally on this tune.
Mm,
So yeah, there's definitely, I guess there's certain intent in terms of what they want to do vocally with this record. But yeah, I think there were definitely, that's probably why I didn't get into this record so much with the point you just made, probably for that reason. There was
mm,
a certain sameness I was feeling, and it just wasn't really catching, you know, the enthusiasm about the record until much later. So I felt that same way. It's probably why I didn't really dive into this record till a little bit later on, because of that feeling of sameness, for a bit.
yeah.
Yeah.
So then we get Ghost of a Chance. And this is one of Neil's sort of relationship songs. He doesn't do a lot of them, but when he does do them, they're very complex. They're not sort of just your simple love song or anything like that. A lot of like this one isn't, but I've noticed a lot of his relationship songs seem to be sort of like have conflict in them and that sort of thing. Whereas I
Right.
don't feel this one does so much.
Yeah.
This is very keyboard heavy, this song, with some almost jazzy guitar parts from Alex. There's almost sort of like jazz fusion-y kind of bits to this, I
Yeah.
feel, at least
Yeah.
from the guitar point of view. Um, I love the juxtaposition between the up-tempo verses and sort of the slow jazzy middle parts of the song. I don't know that I'd quite call them choruses, but um there's sort of this second section after the verses, and it slows right down and it gets sort of jazzy and atmospheric, and there's a lovely lyrical solo from Alex on this song. Probably my
Yeah,
favorite solo of his on the album.
yeah. I think for Alex, it was one of his favorites too. And he did a lot of these solos, like one, two takes straight through all the way. And this particular tune is one of his favorites on the record. And I think he even mentioned there's a couple of solos that he likes. I forget what the actual ones were, but on this record, Ghost of a Chance is one of his favorites from it. I think it might have been Bravado too that he really enjoyed in terms of yeah, it was Bravado and Roll the Bones were his like three favorite solos on this record.
Yeah.
I like this solo because it starts very lyrically and then there's a build that goes on with it, and it gets a smidge shreddy, but I think the melody and the jazziness, as you mentioned, I think that's a good way to describe it, is so prevalent. And any successful solo, if you can whistle or hum the solo, you got something. And Alex just has that ability to play the right thing at the right time. And this song was a fine example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So then we get Neurotica, and the first thing I had to remind myself with this song is that this is not the King Crimson Neurotica,
No,
which is a song I've always really, really loved, but there's nowhere near as chaotic as that song is.
no, no.
Um, but we're back to sort of the uncertainty of life on this song. You get some sort of atmospheric verses, sort of switching into rocking pre-chorus and chorus. So again, you've got that sort of contrast between sort of atmospheric and rocking. Um, Gets a little bit funky in the middle instrumental section too. Um, and then in the I'm calling it the snap section, where
Yes.
it's sort of like each bit starts with Getty saying snap.
Yeah.
Um, we get some bars of 7/4 here, which is the first time that we're getting some time signature differences, because everything up to this point has been 4/4. Um, so that's really cool. And Alex plays another tasty solo on this song. So yeah.
Yeah, I like this tune a lot. And I think even the placement of it is great. And it kind of another bookend, on this record, from this song to the final track, I think is really great. But yeah, I mean, Alex's guitar work is it's just great on this record. It's good to hear him, a bit more prominent as compared to other eras leading up to this point. Okay, especially in the 80s, you lost a little bit of him and he had to find his place within the mix. But yeah, hearing him a bit more prevalent on this record was definitely going back to hear this record again, a while back. I'm like, okay, yeah, I didn't appreciate this the first time around, and I just appreciate it so much more how he wrote what he wrote for this record, and just the fact that they were so, like I mentioned earlier, the enthusiasm of the tracks and even the other bits of this song with Neurotica, those vocal harmonies. That's not something
Mm,
you really think of with Rush, vocal harmonies. So, but I think this song has a good exhibit of that, and other songs too. But I think this one has a nice bit of that on there.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the album ends with You Bet Your Life, which is not about the Groucho Marx game show from the 50s.
No.
Um, it's again, this sort of really lyrically, I feel like it's tying the whole thing up in a little bow, as it were. Um, the opening has a bit of that sort of REM alternative rock feel that they would do a little bit more in the 90s and the 2000s. Um, you know, it wraps up sort of the chance and uncertainty of life themes, as I said, sort of bringing everything to a nice little conclusion. It's another straightforward song musically, but it's a nice up-tempo way to finish the album, I feel like. Um, and we get a lovely melodic solo from Alex to sort of take us out into the fade out of the album.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very well arranged tune. And then just again, the sequencing of these tracks on the record is just there's a flow about it that just feels great as an overall package. And like you mentioned, the tie-in and the
Mm,
tie-up. I think this is the perfect song to end the record because it's definitely that upbeat as well. And there's a lot of upbeat songs on the record, So I think just
Yeah.
this one, I think is probably one of the faster ones. Um, if not maybe the fastest track on the record. I'm not sure what the BPM is on it, but yeah, it's definitely a fantastic closer.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got to say overall, this is a very straightforward album musically, which, you know, might be a little disappointing for the proggy fans or the new wave fans or that sort of thing. But I feel like it's definitely a step in the right direction. It's a step up for me anyway. I don't know exactly where I would rank it in the whole catalog. I will do a ranking at some stage, but I definitely feel like it's a step up from Hold Your Fire and Presto. Um, so yeah, it's sort of, and then of course they would take a complete left turn with the next one with counterparts because that would
Yeah,
get really heavy.
yeah,
So, and then that would kind of point the direction that they would go for the next sort of few albums is being quite heavy. You know, sort of things like Test for Echo and Vapor Trails and even Snakes and Ladders. No, Snakes and Arrows. I
six
keep getting
hours.
that mixed up. But
It's
yeah,
okay.
it feels like, that this is kind of the end of an era, as it were. It's sort of starting to go in the direction that they would go sort of later in the 90s, but sort of the end of an era with the keyboards and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's an interesting album in their catalog, I think, in that respect. Sort of like where it kind of has a little bit of where they're coming from and a little bit of where they're going.
Yes, it's a bridging album for sure. And yeah, that's why I appreciate it now than I more than I did when I first came around. Because you get to see the forward progression, like you just mentioned, that's a great point you made that you get to see the evolutionary chart of the band
Mm,
and where they were going and how good they were getting at arrangement and how things are put together. And again, you sacrifice the proggy bit for more of the arrangement and also the lyrical content, which is what I respond to. And the fact that they take these chances, which is again is the whole theme of the record. The fact that they did a rap song on this record is like
mm,
it's crazy to me, but it fits the theme of the album. It's like it's about taking chances, and you have successes and failures, and however that rolls. So you may gain more fans on this record, or you might lose fans on the record, and even themselves, the band knows themselves that they don't really hold too much stock in what's successful and what's not. They just make their music and they enjoy doing it and they hope that the fans enjoy it as well. So that's kind of
yeah,
what their whole bag is. So the fact that I came back to this record a little bit later on from when it was first put out, I think is a testament to the band as well. So certain albums that people might sort of dog as not their favorites, they may find later on that that record's pretty good. I like what's being said. I like how Neil distilled the themes down to universal approaches where anybody can read the lyrics and go, yeah. And you get to think about, what he's saying on each record, especially this one. For me, it kind of resonated lyrically as well as
yeah,
musically. That's what I got into the band for. I got into the band on a music tip. Like you mentioned, Tom Sawyer was the first song you heard from them. Same
mm,
here. I got Moving Pictures when it came out, then I got Exit Stage Left, and then my journey blossomed from there. I went backwards, then I went forwards. So I'm sure a lot of fans can attest to that experience. So, and then seeing Rush as my very first concert ever, seeing a band was Rush. So I have a long love affair with this band. So, but
yeah,
I think just this album was something that was the reason. That's the reason I wanted to come on. Like I mentioned earlier, is that the return back to this album. And like, what did I miss? I must be missing something because why don't I like it? And then coming back into it and how they put everything together, the themes, the musical arrangement, all that stuff was like it just sounded different to me. Having
yeah,
not listened to it when it came out, now it feels
yeah,
different to me. So anyway, long story long.
yeah. No, no, no. That's really interesting to me because just as a little bit of a heads up for my viewers, in a few months' time, I'm hoping to wrap up this series with a revisiting of Rush's debut album, which was my sort of first album that I heard of theirs. And it didn't really do much for me, and that's why it took me so long to start to actually do this series and get into Rush. So I'm interested if I go back into that album, which I'm intending to do for the finale of the series, whether I'll have the same sort of experience, whether sort of having the breadth of the whole catalog now and knowing everything there is, will that give me a completely different perspective on that debut album and that sort of thing? So so I'm glad to hear that you sort of had that experience with this album, because I'm hoping that maybe I'll have that experience with the debut album, because yeah, I've been really enjoying most of these albums so far. And as far as sort of taking chances on this album and that sort of thing, it did pay off, didn't it? Because this album did, a fair bit better than Presto did, as far as, like, I think it was certified platinum as opposed to only going gold for Presto, and a higher chart position and all that sort of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing to, have this sort of touchback to something that I didn't think was exciting when it came out. So I think
Mm,
you might have the same thing with the first album. Again, it gives you that historical perspective. So if you didn't have the first album, you wouldn't have Fly By Night, and then it goes on and
mm,
on. And just the overall sound and what Alex and Geddy were doing musically, is something too. Not talking about the lyrical content, but just the musical bit of what they were going for. You can hear shades of the future with them, even on that record. It's like they're a more straight ahead record. People
mm,
wouldn't thought it was the Zeppelin record when it first came out, but that's a whole other story. But I think
yeah,
that's something you may find that with that album, the first one, going back to that. So
yeah. So
yeah.
thank you so much, Rob, for doing the show with me. I really, really appreciate it.
You
For
have
any
me.
of my viewers who haven't already from all my other episodes, I will leave links in the description to the various Rush fans web pages, the Instagram and YouTube, and etc. etc. Please do go and give those all a follow and a look, and really, really would appreciate that. Please do like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel out. If you're new to the channel, please go and have a look at some of my other videos. I have everything playlisted, so if you want to see some of my other Bicycle Legs Discovers Rush episodes, I have a playlist for those. If you want to see some of my studio albums ranked shows, I have a playlist for those. If you want to see my appearances on other people's channels, I also have a playlist for those. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm at Bicycle Legs on Instagram, Twitter, and a bunch of other sites. And I also have a dedicated Bicycle Legs Facebook page. Links are all in the doobly doo. Please give those all a follow and join in the conversation. I'd really love to have you there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.